Purpose of this video is to provide a general description of frame data and how it can be used to construct combos in theory before you even start playing a game. This has been really important for me because I have neurological issues with my hands, and so hopefully the same sort of techniques and learning the math behind the game can spare some other folks similar fatigue and pain to what I've experienced. So while we hop into this, it's important to first discuss what is frame data. Frame data is data that provides quantified frame counts, each frame being equal to a 60th of a second, for different portions of a given in-game action, and frequently covers the properties of that action and common situations resulting from the use of that action. Get into more of that in a minute. At its most basic, frame data covers three parts of an action. The startup, so when an animation begins but before you can hurt an enemy with it, the active frames, when an attack can actually damage someone, and recovery frames, after the attack is no longer active, the act of pulling back your fist or retracting the leg after a kick type of thing. So how is this useful? These raw data generally also incorporate how many frames before or after your opponent you recover in different situations. This is referred to as frame advantage on hit or block. And these are in turn dependent on the ideas of hit stun and block stun, with the amount of time your opponent being stuck in an animation of either being hit or blocking one of your attacks after that attack connects. Attacks that miss inherently put you at a disadvantage, as your opponent can move while you cannot, so there isn't frame data associated with that other than just how long the move as a whole takes to complete the action while you're not hitting your opponent. This similar type of disadvantage where you're unable to move but your opponent can isn't too dissimilar from knockdown situations, but there are some important distinctions that if you haven't experienced yet while you're playing will be covered when I make a follow-up video to this about frame traps and meaty setups. So we've got this data that exists, and you can, if you don't already have it pulled up, I use the frame assisted tool. There's a link to it in the description of the video. We're going to be working primarily with Ryu today, so you may want to have that pulled up as a reference as I work my way through this. So we've got all these numbers, and you can see on the video, if you're watching this, I've got Ryu already pulled up and ready to go as a part of this large screen. You can hear Street Fighter in the background. I promise we'll get to that in a minute. But I do want to introduce to you what exactly these data actually mean. So as you can see, it's not just one column of data. There's a number of different things that are going on here. And some of them I've already mentioned, like the startup, active, and recovery frames, as well as on hit and on block. Those first columns, so it's columns 2 through 6 to the right of the move name. That's what we're going to be focusing on in this video today. Before we can get into exactly how you use this to build a combo, it's important to define a few things about how these actions interact with each other in the process of constructing a combo. The first is a link. A link is when the hit stun from one move leaves a character at enough frame advantage after recovering that another attack can start up and reach its active frames before your opponent has recovered from being hit. This is true of both grounded attacks and instances where your opponent is put in a juggle state, allowing you to follow up with a second attack while they're airborne. On the other hand, a cancel is when a portion of one action, usually the recovery frames and all but one of the active frames, are canceled or removed, which allows a follow-up action to start when the first attack would normally still be recovering. This concept applies both to special cancels and V-trigger cancels, as well as to chainable light buttons and target combos in Street Fighter V. There are other instances of cancels that exist in other games, but I'm going to be focused primarily on the most common cases that you'll see in Street Fighter V. So now we know, in general, different ways that combos can be constructed from a theoretical perspective, right? You can link things together if your opponent's in enough hit stun, or you can cancel out of one attack into another with enough of a cancel window that the second attack still connects. First, let's dive more into links. So in order for two buttons to link in a combo, there are 4 general conditions that you have to meet. First, the frame advantage on hit of the first attack has to be equal to or greater than the startup frames of the second attack. Second, the opponent must be in a condition where they can be hit after the first attack. So for instance, if you knock them down with your first attack, your follow-up can't hit them while they're still in the process of recovering from being knocked down. Third, along similar lines, the opponent must be close enough for the second attack to hit. If the first attack pushes them back too far, even if the frame data suggests that the second attack would come out fast enough, if it doesn't have the reach, it won't combo. And fourth, if the opponent is in a juggle state, the follow-up attack must have enough juggle points to continue the combo. Now, the juggle system is worthy of its own tutorial, and conveniently, a number of them have already been done quite well. So if you look in the links of this video, I've attached links for 2 different places you can go, one of which is a video that unfortunately doesn't have an audio description, and the second one is a written description on a forum page, so whichever of those is more convenient for you, definitely take advantage of it. Moving on, let's get back to links. So we know the opponent has to be stunned for long enough for the next attack to hit, but how do we actually find that in the frame data? So this is where the on hit and on block columns come into play, specifically in our case, the on hit column. The number in this column represents the difference in frames between you and your opponent when you recover. If it's a positive number, it means you're recovering that many frames before your opponent. If it's a negative number, the opposite is true. Your opponent is recovering first and can act before you can. So, before we dive further in and actually start practicing some of these links, it's important to have your training opponent in practice mode set to block after the first hit. This helps you recognize if you drop any combos or mistime something, or even discover something that looked like it was feasible actually doesn't work. You can do this by opening the practice menu, and this assumes the default configuration of the practice menu, tapping the right bumper once to get to the settings menu for your training opponent, tapping down twice to guard selection, and then tapping to the right twice, which will set the guard option to after first attack. This means that if your first attack is successfully comboed into subsequent attacks, the dummy will continue to get hit. If not, they will block the follow-up attacks within a certain time frame. Before we, let's look at this using Ryu's standing medium punch. And I apologize for those of you who may have been relying on lip reading up to this point. I'm popping into a full screen mode with the game just now. So I promise you can look. There is a full, the full script that I'm reading from is going to be posted with this video. So if the captions aren't fixed correctly by the time you get to this video, or you just want to read the written version, it should be available to you there. So, starting here, we're going to look at using Ryu's standing medium punch. This is a punch that has 5 frames of startup and is +7 on hit, meaning that the opponent is stunned for long enough after a standing medium punch, for 7 additional frames after you've recovered, for another standing medium punch to start up, which is 5 frames, and to get to the active part of the attack before your opponent recovers. So, in theory, this is a punch that can be linked to itself as long as your opponent is in range. So, here, practicing it in practice mode, you can see that, yes, it does form a 2-hit combo. You'll notice that if I were to press it again, my opponent would be out of range. All attacks have some amount of inherent pushback on them, both when blocking and when being hit. This is to help ensure that attacks like this, where the medium punch can combo into itself, wouldn't effectively become an infinite. There are other reasons why that pushback exists in terms of controlling spacing and managing the flow of the fight from a game design perspective, but I'm not going to go into those here. I'm sure there are much better tutorials out there about fighting game design that will cover those aspects much more effectively than I ever could. Alright, so moving on from here, let's check another example with Ryu that's a little bit less straightforward, right? So the first one was 2 standing medium punches, and if you hit them fast enough with the correct timing, you get the combo. Now let's take a look at Ryu's heavy punch. So if you look in the frame data, you'll see that Ryu's standing heavy punch is +3 on hit, suggesting that any attack that has 3 frames or less of startup should be able to link. When you look through the frame data of normal attacks, you'll see that Ryu has 3-frame startup button in his standing light punch, which is great, right? Now we can see from the math, we're going to be moving 3 frames before our opponent when the standing heavy punch hits. This attack in the standing light punch only has 3 frames of startup. They should combo. So let's go into the lab and test it out. So here is the standing heavy punch, and the follow-up whiffs. Once again, we're going back to fulfilling the 4 requirements, and in this case, the third one, with the opponent being in range to be hit, will never be fulfilled with this particular order of attacks. Ryu's standing heavy punch has too much pushback on it, so it will never be able to combo into that standing light punch. This is part of why, while it's good to have combo routes that you can chart out mathematically, you do need to test everything in the lab before you actually try and apply it in a match to ensure that it's something that is physically feasible within the constraints of the game. Alright, so we've covered the basics of links and some of the issues that you might run into with them. So let's talk about a different type of combo construction. I'm going to swap out of Street Fighter again so that you can go back to lip reading if that's something that was helpful to you. So at this point, we're moving on from links to cancels. The first thing I want to cover are what are called chain cancels. This is a type of normal attack canceling where the recovery of one attack is partially removed to allow comboing with another attack. In Street Fighter V, these are specifically light buttons, and it will be light buttons chaining to other light buttons, not to other attacks, as has been the case in other past games with normal cancel options. You can determine that this is a property of a move by looking at the cancel info column on the frame-assisted tool, either the app if you're working on a phone, or the direct web page if you're on a computer, in order to determine whether or not these attacks can actually be chained into each other. So what specifically makes a chain cancel unique in terms of normal cancels within Street Fighter is the fact that the second attack retains all of its on-hit or on-block properties. When we get into target combos in a minute, you'll see that that's usually not the case, but for chain attacks, it is true. So if you're chaining 2 lights together, the number of frames that you have either to your advantage or disadvantage on hit or block will remain the same based on the final hit in the combo. So we can see this property at play if we take a look at Ryu's crouching light attacks. Both his crouching light punch and his crouching light kick are chain cancelable. If you look at just the raw frame data, the crouching light kick is only +2 on hit. The crouching light punch is only +3 on hit, but both have 4 frame startups, which suggests, hey, we're missing a frame or 2 here. These two shouldn't fit together neatly in a combo. However, if you take them into the lab, and I'm swapping back to the game again here, you will find that if you press the button fast enough, you can chain them into each other as well as into themselves. So again, an instance where the frame data wouldn't on its face suggest, oh, these are able to cancel into each other and work in that fashion. We find that in fact, because of this chain cancel property, this is something that is possible within the engine. So moving on from chain cancels into target combos. Target combos are similar in that there's normal attacks canceling into other normal attacks, but usually have very specific button sequences that have to be used, where you can't interchange one attack for another in most cases. Additionally, while the chain attacks do remain the same in terms of frame advantage on hit or block at the end of the combo, most of the time with a target combo, the number of frames that had to be canceled in order to allow the 2 normals to combo together will be added on, or rather subtracted from the player's frame advantage on block by the final hit of the target combo. Additionally, it's pretty common for target combos to have different end states than just the raw move that was the last one in the combo. The example that I'll be using is Ryu's standing medium punch, heavy kick target combo. And again, I'm swapping back to the game just to highlight some of these differences. So when you look at Ryu's normal heavy kick, it is +4 on hit. If your opponent is blocking, it is -1 on block. Also on hit, you'll notice that the opponent just sort of gets hit in place, isn't knocked down, isn't launched into the air, remains standing but at frame disadvantage after the hit. On the other hand, if you do the target combo, you'll notice that the last 2 hits leave you significantly negative on block at -7. And if you go all the way through on hit, you get a knockdown out of the air. So again, highlighting the fact that these target combos have different properties than the normal buttons do, both in terms of frame advantage or disadvantage on block at the end, but also in the state that they leave your opponent after the target combo is finished. There are a number of characters that have target combos that are pretty integral to the way that they play the game. A classic example here would be Ken, where his higher damage combos frequently come out of a route that contains his target combo. Generally, you'll attack with one button or a jump-in attack, follow up with the target combo, and finish with some sort of juggling special attack for lots of damage. However, there are some players that will try and go into the target combo raw, either because they know that they'll be able to use it to punish something that they've just blocked or a button that their opponent just whiffed, or because they're okay with taking a particularly high risk at a given moment in time. So, up till this point, we've covered normal cancels, which take place in Street Fighter V, primarily in the form of chainable light attacks and target combos. Keep in mind that in both of these instances, the specific lights that are chainable and the routes for the target combos will be character specific. So just because Ryu can do them in one way doesn't mean that anyone else in the cast can. Moving on from normal cancels, I'm going to tackle special cancels next. I do want to note that there are also V-trigger cancels, which I won't be covering in this video. They work in a manner similar to special attack cancels, but do have their own columns in the Frame Assisted Tool app or web page designating the number of frames you are ahead of your opponent after performing that cancel. So if you're looking to form a combo based on those, check out that column and move from there as if you were linking attacks together. A special cancel is a way to cancel specific normal attacks, and again, the specific attacks that are cancelable depends on the character, by starting up a special attack while the normal attack is still in the process of hitting the opponent. If timed correctly, the recovery frames and all but one of the active frames, in most cases, of the normal attack will be canceled, which is to say they're removed after the opponent has already been hit by the normal attack, allowing the special attack to start up much sooner. Keep in mind that the opponent is still in the same amount of hit stun after being hit by the normal attack. So your opponent doesn't recover any sooner when you cancel your recovery frames of the cognate normal, but instead you just get to start up your special move a lot faster. So let's talk about this on more specific mathematical terms. For this example, I'm going to be using Ryu's crouching medium punch into a fireball. This is one of the classic sort of Ryu poke combos. It's great for catching someone if they're walking toward you, and his crouching medium punch in general is a good, safe button for Ryu to use, so it's something that you'll come across pretty commonly. The crouching medium punch has 6 frames of startup, is active for 3 frames, and recovers for 12 frames, while also being +4 on hit. So if we take one of Ryu's non-EX fireballs, which is what we're concerned with here, you'll see that all of his fireballs have 14 frames of startup. If I recovered fully after hitting with the crouching medium punch, and then try and throw a fireball as a link, that fireball isn't going to connect until my opponent has been able to move 410 frames, right? That's when the fireball is going to become active. Again, this is the hit advantage on the crouching medium punch being 4 frames. The startup of the fireball is 14 frames. When you subtract the frame advantage from the startup of the fireball, you're left with 10 remaining activation frames on the fireball before it can actually hit the opponent. Obviously, this is not a great situation. However, if you time the fireball input so that it finishes as or slightly before the medium punch connects with your opponent, the recovery frames and all but the first active frame of the medium punch will be canceled, allowing the fireball to start up right away. So how does this work out specifically mathematically? In order to calculate how many frames you have to start up a special attack, you want to look at the hit advantage plus the recovery frames plus all of the active frames minus 1. Keep in mind that if your advantage on hit is negative, you will still be adding that negative number, or subtracting the number, from the total in this instance. For Ryu's crouching medium punch, this is the 4 inherent frame advantage plus 12 recovery frames, so we're up to 16, plus 3 active frames, 19, minus 1 for the active frame that actually connected on the opponent. A total of 18 frames available for a special to start up and continue the combo. As the fireball has 14 startup frames, you would expect it to combo, and I'm going to swap back to the game here to demonstrate real quick. And you can see, hopefully, if I don't mess this up, that in fact, a fireball will combo when canceled out of a crouching medium punch. So hopping back to the math real quick, just to provide a different example to contrast what happens when the math doesn't quite work out and highlight that this is, in fact, the correct model to think about. If I consider, instead of the crouching medium punch, which we know has 18 frames available for a special attack to start up, I look at the crouching medium kick. So crouching medium kick is plus 2 on hit, has 13 recovery frames, and 3 active frames. So again, adding these together, we have 2 plus 13 is 15, plus 3 is 18, minus 1 for the active frame that's actually hitting the opponent, or 17 total frames available for special attack startup. If we consider a different special move as well, in this case the half circle forward and heavy kick special that Ryu has available, we have a good way to differentiate on the basis of a single frame, because this special attack has 18 frames of startup. So, if the model I'm presenting is correct, you would expect the crouching medium punch to be able to combo into this half circle forward and heavy kick special by way of a special cancel, whereas the crouching medium kick would not. And so let me pull back up Street Fighter here, and we'll see it in practice. There you can see the crouching medium kick connected, and the crouching medium kick gets blocked. So again, this math, I've chosen examples where it specifically does work. Please keep in mind that there are instances where the game designers, even though the math on its face looks like it should work, when you actually test the combo out, it doesn't. An example of this for me is specifically with Kage. His crouching medium kick has 20 theoretical frames of special startup after a special cancel, but the heavy kick Tatsu, which has 20 frames of startup, doesn't combo on a special cancel. I don't know exactly how that works, but there seems to be instances where there is a hidden rule dictating that certain combo routes are impossible. Again, highlighting why it's important to, after you've theoretically discovered a combo, actually test it in the lab to make sure that it works. Finally, I'm going to move on to a more complex example with Ryu that fits all of this together. And this is actually a mid-screen damage optimal combo for Ryu, so feel free to use this in your matches and dunk on some people. So let's start with the actual route that we're taking. This route starts with a jumping heavy punch, followed by a standing medium punch, linked to a crouching heavy punch that's special canceled into the EX donkey kick that we just showed, the half circle forwards and kick special. And finally, there is a juggle off of the wall bounce that EX move gives into a heavy punch, dragon punch, so a heavy DP. So, the full frame breakdown on this. Jump-in attacks will give you different amounts of frame advantage depending on the distance between where on your opponent you connected and the ground. Basically, the animation of the jump-in attack is immediately canceled when you touch the ground. So if you hit your opponent lower, it will get canceled sooner in the opponent's recovery, allowing you to act on the ground faster. No matter where you hit them, your opponent is stunned for the same amount of time. And so there are certain instances of combos where you have to specifically hit your opponent low in order to have enough frames to combo. However, in this case, the jumping heavy kick from Ryu leaves you somewhere from plus 15 to plus 20 on hit, depending on exactly where you hit, but that's more than enough time for the 5 frame standing medium punch to connect. So there's our first link. We know that that works without issue. Next up, we have the standing medium punch being plus 7 on hit, which we are trying to combo into a crouching heavy punch, which has 6 startup frames. You've got 7 frames to work with after you've hit your opponent, so the theoretical follow-up there absolutely works. So what we've got so far is a jumping heavy kick followed by a standing medium punch and then a crouching heavy punch. You'll notice that I'm always going to be doing the heavy kick jumping toward my opponent. This is necessary in order to get the close spacing needed for the standing medium punch to crouching heavy punch link. You can see there I pressed the crouching heavy punch a hair too late. There it is. So we've got the first 3 hits up to the first special cancel. So the EX donkey kick has 18 frames, just like the heavy kick version. So what's the frame situation around this crouching heavy punch? You can see it doesn't look good when you first start off, right? You can see on the left half of the screen an indicator telling me that even on hit, this is -7. So let's look at the full frame data. Crouching heavy punch is -7 on hit, has 4 active frames, 24 frames of recovery. So total, you have -7 plus 4 plus 24 minus 1 for a total of 20 frames, 2 more than the 18 frames we need to cancel into that EX donkey kick. So just to demonstrate real quick, here is the crouching heavy punch into that EX donkey kick, and notice the wall bounce there. So that wall bounce is something that is kind of hinted at if you read the description of the EX move on the Frame Assisted Tool app. Again, you can basically click on a move and it'll provide you a list of some additional features that move might have. But without actually coming into the lab and observing, oh, hey, I'm getting a wall bounce that's really far back toward me, you may not have known that this combo was possible. So finally, the whole combo, hopefully. And there you have it. A combo theoretically possible, a final link that required some lab-based discovery, and you have a 350 damage mid-screen combo for Ryu when you're spending 1 bar of meter. So that ends the basic tutorial here for the different aspects of links and cancels when examining them from a frame data perspective. One last parting note. When you're constructing your combos, make sure you're taking note of how negative your attacks are on block. Many characters, including Ryu, will leave themselves wide open for a punish if you're automatically doing an entire combo while your opponent is still blocking. This has to do with many of the special attacks that characters have being significantly negative on block. If you're able to stop the combo before the final special cancel, a lot of times you will be either safe from an attack, so you will be at more than a -2 frame differential. The fastest attack in the game is 3 frames, so if you're only -2, you can't be punished. Or in some cases, you'll actually be at a frame advantage and will have other opportunities to continue offense in a safe manner. If you have any questions about this video, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitch or Twitter. Both usernames are thatphageguy, or via email at thatphageguy@gmail.com. All of those links you'll also find in the description of this video if it's easier to check them out there. Keep an eye out for a follow-up video after this one where I'll be covering meaty timings and frame traps using frame data. And good luck, have fun, and happy labbing.